So our next speaker is RJ Taylor. So RJ is a second generation fish farmer and processor at Spring Hill Fish. He farms in Grey County and Manitoulin Island. He's also the managing director for the Ontario Aquaculture Association and vice chair on Elric's board. And before he came back to take over the family farms, he spent a decade in science outreach at Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, University of Toronto, and Dyson. So welcome, RJ. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes. So, wow, I must say this has been a really, really fantastic morning. I do want to applaud Jennifer and Jean and Kelly. I think Elric is so uniquely situated to pull such diverse perspectives and people all together in one room. I think as we get more and more siloized with time, that capacity just becomes more beneficial. So I really love to give them a round of applause for everything. Okay, so when Kelly had me locked in a car with her on Manitoulin Island, she asked me if I would speak on behalf of every farmer everywhere today. And so I thought that's a pretty audacious goal. So I tried to put sort of my advice into 5 buckets today. I'm sure to offend someone somewhere, but it told me the hell with it, so here we go. And I hope my fellow farmers agree with me. So I will say that if you have any issues with the graphics in my presentation, you can talk to ChatGPT, including whatever this thing is up here. That's what it thinks we farm today. So, okay, so the first point is just about involving, I think this has sort of been touched on in other presentations, but really involving the farmers from the outset in the project design. I think that that's the easiest way to do that is to get out and visit farms. We're a lot more open and inviting than I think a lot of people think we are. But, you know, just calling up your random farm might not be the best approach. So that's really where they call them sector association or commodity groups. They're really always happy to connect you in with a certain farmer that they know that's eager and willing, or to give you a sort of lay of the land before you find which farmers you want to rope in. And another great way to get out and talk to the farmers is through our industry conferences. So almost every group from Ontario Pork to Ontario Aquaculture Association, we pull our farmers together at least once a year for a big sort of conference. It's a little bit different than an academic conference. There's still a lot of socializing and beers and presentations, but the talks are, you know, a lot more broad sweeping and sort of cover everything from technology to government updates and things like that. And so I think if you're ever sort of looking for an opportunity to either get feedback or sort of share, they're great to attend and meet informally, but also I feel like speaking on behalf of the sector groups, we can always make space for you. I have some anti-advice here. Things that I've learned sort of in the 5 or 6 years that I've been working on our Ontario Aquaculture Association is that email surveys are a very ineffective way of talking to producers. I think farmers, when it comes to email, the computer isn't something that takes up a lot of our days. We kind of have to sit down and get whatever we need done, and then we move on. So even when I think through the OAA, if I email all the producers and said, if you complete the survey, you'll get a free iPad, and this is going to help the future of the sector, I still think my response rate would be less than 10%. Another thing is webinars. They have a really hard time. We've had a few folks trying to reach out to our farmers that way, and attendance can be very, very challenging for those. And then I just put hosting specific events as a way of encouraging anyone who wants to reach farmers to go where the farmers are at and reach them, because trying to get them to come out to specific events can be a challenge. So I must say, I expected this morning's talks to beat the researchers up a little bit more about involving farmers. I was surprised that wasn't on the agenda, even though I just did it. But what I really wanted to highlight here as a farmer myself is that I think there's just as much responsibility to involve the farmer in the research process as much as there is the researcher into the farm and the way that it works. And I think that's because research is a very big word for those out on farm and even working in supporting farming sectors. And from that, I mean, sometimes we hear about research findings or maybe we should get involved in research projects, but there's not a lot more beyond that explaining it. From that, I mean, when we're like, is this research project a big multi-year alliance grant? Or is it like a 1-year type project? Is it an industry partner that's gone to the university for a very specific problem and they need a producer? Is it an undergrad or graduate capstone project of some sort? Is this more under the training umbrella than necessarily like pure research? And then also like the concept of like, what's a tenured professor versus the grad students in different levels of schooling? A lot of those things we take for granted in a room like this, but out on farm and even in the industry associations, there's not a lot of understanding about that. And if you're if you're sort of bringing in the farmer or going out to the farmer, really helping understand a lot of those processes helps manage some expectations. So we had a little bit of an unfortunate incident between a research group and one of our farms in recent years, because it was we farmers should get involved with researchers, but there wasn't a lot of understanding around like the expectations, because when you find a troublesome research finding or something that they saw on the farm that really wasn't necessarily meant to be part of the research project, next thing you know, from a farmer's perspective, that data is published in a peer-reviewed public journal that's citable by the media. And so that concept of like, who owns the data, what happens to it out there, is a little nebulous and confusing. So I really would say if we're talking about, going through those early steps of the research and then getting into the sort of pilot scale on farm, applying it on farm, or that side of things, really work through that sort of expectation setting and explaining for that. Because I must say that incident was a huge surprise for a lot of our producers and really put a poor taste in our industry's mouth about working with researchers. So I asked our dear friend ChatGPT, that I call Ember now, to give me 15 things that a researcher considers when they're designing a project. So that's what this is. So when someone in the research space, be it a private company or more in academia, you're looking at, what's the rigor of the methodology? How is it relevant? Is it feasible? Where's the money? Looking at the time frame, to fit in the grant timelines, all of those things. But have a slight different opinion of research on farm, because for us, it's mostly the economics. I think there's been, and so before we get too wrapped up in that, you can break up the economics into sustainability and conservation. Is there a new welfare practice that's going to help us improve our story and increase sales? It's going to save us money. It's going to help with my labor shortages. And then there's the everything else category there. But I find that disconnect sometimes, because especially when I see some of the interactions between the researchers and some of our producers at, say, our annual conference, that the hearing that the economics is like a sort of 5 or 10% of it, kind of gets some very blank stares from us farmers, because we're like, well, how is that feed ingredient going to improve things next season or next year? It's like, well, the economics in 5 years, olive oil might be applicable, or 10 years, where we think cricket meal will be at a point where it can be commercially feasible. But this is less of a soapboxy thing and more of a to improve communication between these two groups, just understanding our different priorities. A fourth thing, this is what Ember thinks a nervous farmer couple looks like, is about de-risking. So I think that a lot of other areas in the business world think that the risk tolerance of farmers being so high, it's like, unheard of in other sectors, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily love to take on even more risk just because we're used to it. And so sometimes a barrier to that sort of last step of that commercialization chain is the fact that anything I'm going to try out on my farm and my fellow farmers are going to try out has a risk. It could go wrong. It could also go very right. But I think if there's, well, we're thinking of sort of a whole systems approach, offering some sort of ways of de-risking that for the farmers to at least give it a try is going to lead to much more massive adoption. And that's, mainly financial incentives if it goes wrong, some sort of a small scale risk sharing program. And then also just encouraging to start small and things, even though a lot of the data and with support going big is going to have good results. Just starting small is a very simple way of de-risking. So my last point before food comes is that if we're talking about getting research into practice on farms, the best person to encourage a farmer to do that is another farmer. I'm really sorry I put the line through the researchers there, but there's sort of a propensity to think that research is much more like longer term and like not necessarily the most applicable, interesting, but like not really applicable to us right now. But if you hear a farmer talking about something that's working, you're bound to listen. And often it only takes one or two farmers to convince 100 other farmers. So and that's really sort of under the bucket of effective communications, which we've talked about a lot today. And it's not necessarily just getting your farmer champion, but demonstrating it on farm, making sure your case studies are local, and then using tools like social media. Awesome to see these podcasts out today and YouTube. I think after I've cleaned a bunch of tanks or moved a bunch of fish, I just sit down at the workbench. I necessarily don't open my phone and read my email. I just sometimes go on Instagram or Facebook. And that's a really great place to reach farmers where they're at. So if you're wondering, does ChatGPT think all farmers look like this? No, I told it to make the farmer's head stir. So that's what this guy is right here. Like, look at him right there. So, okay, that's all I have today. And this pun is also ChatGPT. And these are thankful farmers. So thank you very much. And
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. My question is really the last slide. So recently we completed a project and asked different stakeholders about what are the effectiveness of different extension methods. So one of the findings we found social media or any kind of online media is not that effective. But it becomes more effective when we can use more what we call personalized advice.
Oh, awesome.
So personalized advice could be more targeted message. It could be you do social media, but you have a chance to organize, integrate some kind of workshop, right? So there is many ways you can actually provide advice that is very targeted to specific farmers or farmers group. I don't know how do you think about that, like I said, because the study we did is more multi-stakeholders, farmers is also one of the participants, but is it the same, farmers think the personalized advice is important, whether it's provided online or, or face-to-face?
Yeah. So I think that I interpret when you say sort of personalized advice or personalized stories to sort of, I think I would use that to mention that farmers aren't really any different than the public in the sense of you can put a lot of graphs, persuasive graphs and data in front of us to persuade us, but it really takes one compelling story that I find relevant to how I do things that's probably going to convince folks to try it. So I hope that answers your question, but I think the best ways I would perhaps encourage for that, you know, if you're trying to share findings, say at an industry conference, for instance, like having a researcher and a farmer tag team it together to share the results. Those types of things help personalize it, but yeah. Going simple. Lots of hands. Oh no, that's somebody.
First off, RJ, dang, tell us how you really feel about us researchers. Second off, I was speaking with a few of the people during the break, and one thing we were discussing was incentives on the farmer side. Because we talk a lot as researchers about the incentives of knowledge transfer and trying to apply our research to industry. But is there any incentives that you've seen given for industry to implement these researches, to take the risks and to try and overcome logistical and cost barriers, which can prevent a lot of farmers from taking on research? Have you seen anything like that? Have you applied to any? Have you participated with any?
So I think I can answer that two ways. I think the first one is, I think everybody in this room, we all benefit from being part of such a progressive and passionate field. You know, I talk to folks in other career areas and other work areas, and it's just never seems quite as passionate as it is in agriculture because of what we're doing. So I think there's just like an embedded passion for better animal welfare, the sustainability, emissions side of things and helping the planet, and then just growing food for people. So like when I do see these types of projects successful on reaching out to farms and making them work, it is more of like an emotional play, like we're compelled to want to do something better and do something different. But have I seen a program that helps farmers de-risk this adoption or encourages it? No, not necessarily. So. And I will say, I really didn't mean to offend any researchers here. I spent a lot of time at the Ontario Agricultural Research Center, Sam Scrine over there. And there are more examples of this amazing research being translated on farms for better asparagus and better chickens and better fish and all of these things. And I'm really thankful for what all of you folks do. I just texted Mike McMorris after our planning call and said, I think I offended someone. He said, go for it. Don't hold back. So anyway.
Can I just toss in an answer to that too? Because I think that if you want a partnership de-risking and investing on the back end, then everybody needs to be involved at the front end. So I think that if you want commodity organizations and farmers collaborating on the back end and helping with, you know, getting your research into practice, then part of it is speaking to the Poultry Industry Council's point of what is the win from the outset for those people should be incorporated into the design at the very beginning, so that there's incentive all the way through to partner in the delivery of the project.
And I think there was one more question over there. Popular.
I just something kind of quick to add to that, and RJ, you mentioned kind of a horror story in working with researchers and not understanding like who owns the data or the knowledge gained from it. Do you think that we would benefit from kind of having a protocol or standard code of practice in researchers, industry, or farmers, like going into it, that's standard across different sectors of the livestock industry, so that we know that before the research is complete and studies are published?
I would absolutely support that, because I think as much as I kicked the researchers, I also kicked the farmers for not understanding this process either. That was really meant to be a farmer day. But I think that it falls, if every interaction with a farmer or industry, like the responsibility of sharing all that information, like falls on you as the researchers, like I think there is a way to probably streamline that. Like when you go to the dentist and they make you sign this sheet, it's like, oh, we might cut your tongue and we might do this and we might do that. You don't read it, but then they cut your tongue and you complain and they say, we'll give you the sheet. I think there's a better way to do it than that, but there could be some sort of an info session or communication, because it would be helpful, I think, in retrospect.
Okay, I wish you would have told me years ago that nobody listens to us. I wasted my whole trying to talk to them. Anyway, more seriously, give the researchers a few tips on how we best can communicate with farmers, because we obviously have to. Through this whole sort of process here. So what are your tips for communicating with farmers more effectively?
Great. I think the first one was about reaching the farmers where they're at. And I know that you have spent a lot of time on farms and involved in the industry associations, and that is why every fish farmer listens to you, Rich. But I think sort of reaching them in that capacity. But like I think back to that sort of earlier point, when farmers are brought in right near the end, they sort of have missed the mark on what the benefits are, and I feel like I've seen more instances of like being told why this is good, instead of sometimes asking the questions about how things work on the farm. But I'm sure many of you have worked with farmers, but when you really start asking questions about the processes and why they do things, we don't stop talking because we're really excited about things. So I think the first step would probably be listening to them and asking questions. And yeah, I think Cheryl had lots more ideas when I set the mic down.
Last one.
So, and I wanted to add to that, thanks so much, RJ. As a farmer, you did a great job, right? Just how KTT is like marbled through everything, can we have an economic analysis marbled through everything? Because I'd almost want that to be the first slides that you've thought about from our perspective, the economics. And then be willing to talk after that. Not a question.
Good way to end it.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you so much, RJ.